I call Todd Muller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Rise to take a short call on the Building Pools Amendment Bill, and essentially I guess we have the question here around what's good policy, you know, the balance between public safety on the one hand and the efficient administration of that policy on the other. You know, what's the right landing point with respect to that question? But one thing that really underpins this bill, as we read it for the first time, is that rules need to be effectively applied, proportional to the risk at hand, and of course consistently applied as opposed to the sporadic, which has clearly been in the case of the Swimming Pools Act since 1987. But to be fair, we're not approaching this from a blank sheet of paper. We have an established piece of legislation, that Act that was passed in 87, and we do have to acknowledge that as an underpinning piece of legislation, it has been successful. It has kept young children safer than they otherwise would have been, Mr Speaker. The rate of drownings, as we've already heard from my esteemed colleague to my left, Scott Simpson, has dropped from 100 young children in the 10 years to 1987 to 30 in the 10 years to 2012. These are young children being saved by this piece of legislation, and so it's not surprising that the evidence shows that if we fence swimming pools, then we obviously reduce the risk of drownings. And in fact, most, if not all, not quite all, but most drownings occur in pools with non-compliant barriers. But as we have heard, there are some challenges with respect to the current law that this bill addresses. As early as 1989, 2 years after the initial Act came into place, feedback from the community was that it was difficult to work with. The rules were duplicated under two acts. Initially the 87 Swimming Pool Act, more latterly the Building Act of 04. They are particularly inconsistently applied and cumbersome, and I think that's probably the key message that the community has sent to us over the last few years. Wide variations in inspections, Mr Speaker, some every 3 years, other councils no planned inspections at all. And also the view around needing some permanent barrier with respect to spa pools, you know, clearly onerous. When you look at the nature of spa pools today, the heaviness of the secure lid, that was disproportional to the risk at hand. So, Mr Speaker, this bill, I think quite sensibly, seeks to bring together all those community concerns over the lack of consistency of reviewing the potential barriers, the particular barriers that are up there, real focus in on spa pools and how to more effectively manage those. And Mr Speaker, the bill has a list of areas that we're going to step through, and also be consistent with respect to the 5-year requirement for all councils to view that you're actually got a compliant swimming pool set up, which I think will be very good. And also then giving the council a consistent approach in terms of response to enforcement, notice of infringement first, and following up with the ultimate $500 or even $5,000 fine if it unnecessarily has to go to that level. So, Mr Speaker, I'm very supportive. I think this is good public policy. I'm pleased to hear that we've got, from what it sounds like, pretty broad support from the House. I do look forward to the Select Committee process, as Mr Simpson has outlined. I think we will get a lot of people from the community, and I will await with interest to hear their views on what we have put forward, and look forward to the process. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Jan Logie.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
Koutou te whare. I rise to take a call on the first reading of the